Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways. This episode explores topics that some may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. She lies by the wall, groaning. The prisoners in the Sonderkommando, a special unit assigned to pull the corpses apart and empty the gas chambers, find her, a 16-year-old girl covered with dead bodies. They carry her into an adjoining room and wrap her in a coat. No one has ever survived gassing before. On his rounds, an SS Oberscharfer notices the group. One of the prisoners pleads for the girl's life. Please let her pass through the gate and join the other women on the road building unit. But the guard shakes his head. The girl might talk. He beckons a colleague over. He has no hesitation either. A bullet to the back of the neck. That's an account in Auschwitz, a History by Sybil Steinbacher. Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Murray and James Holland, for the third part of our series looking at Auschwitz. James, I think it's fair to say that what we've done in the previous two episodes is laid out the circumstances of Auschwitz's development, partnership between the state and German industry in the form of IG Farben to create the camp as it became. But on this episode, we're going to be looking at, I think, the thing that people know about Auschwitz.
The mass extermination.
The mass extermination. The camp which was, up until this point, concentration camp, becomes an extermination camp, a sort of double-headed monster, isn't it?
Yeah, and Auschwitz-Birkenau, unlike the other Operation Reinhard extermination camps, is not designed as an extermination camp. It evolves into one.
Yes.
And although systematic killing at the camp has begun in 1942, at Auschwitz-Birkenau, Auschwitz II as it becomes known, it only really becomes the centre of mass extermination in the second half of 1943, after Belzec's abandoned.
Yeah.
And then the other Reinhard camps at Sobibor and Treblinka. So they have these, what stops them is they are in the general government, Treblinka and Sobibor and Belzec, and there are uprisings on the 2nd of August in Treblinka, which is organised by a Jewish former captain in the Polish army called Julian Czorozicki and a number of others. And they break into the arsenal there, they take weapons, and 700 Jews launch an attack, setting fire to buildings and so on. Around 200 people escape, and actually of those 270 survive beyond the end of the war. So actually, in terms of escapes, that's a pretty good effort. I mean, it's still absolutely horrendous odds, obviously. The guy who's overseeing these camps is Odilo Globocnik, who ends up doing horrific things in kind of sort of Trieste area at the end of the war in Italy. And he closes the camp soon after and takes with him Franz Stangl, who was the commandant there. And they all end up in Trieste. And then the Sobibor uprising, that's on the 14th of October 1943. So, just a few months afterwards. And again, there's an underground movement in the camp, and that kills 11 SS guards. They kind of make another break for freedom, and about 300 get out. And at that point, Himmler orders the camp to be closed as well. So prisoners from Treblinka, they're brought in to dismantle it, and then they're all shot. It's just horrific. So between the 1st and 10th of November 1943. And then the last prisoners at Majdanek, they're shot in November 1943. As 8,000 of them. And after that, Auschwitz-Birkenau becomes a number one killing facility. So it has so all these uprisings in Sobibor and Treblinka and so on, and the end of Majdanek, that has a really big knock-on effect.
But Operation Reinhardt, which is the thing that's been in motion really since the previous 2 years, isn't it? Is the extermination of Jews local to Germany's conquests. What Auschwitz becomes is the place where Jews from elsewhere, from other territories that have been conquered or overpowered by the Nazis, where they end up being sent. So
and to begin with, it's the Jews from the West.
Exactly. That's my point.
France and the Netherlands and and Belgium.
Yeah, which, although it's in what we see as the East in Poland, it's principally the people who are sent there aren't from there. They've already been murdered.
Yes, yeah. It's all the other Jews of Europe.
Yes, exactly. At these other camps, they're moving on to the next set of people. The sort of scale of it, what Reinhard has achieved, for want of a better word, is boggling, isn't it? Actually, the bulk of the Jews murdered in the Second World War are killed in the Reinhard operations, aren't they?
Yes, and also just shot in Soviet Union and the Baltic states in those early days. Up until the use of gas chambers, really, that's the number one way. It's kind of standing by the pit, shot the back of the neck and pack them in. But anyway, we've got to talk about the gas chambers.
Yes, we do,
The first gas chamber at Birkenau, so as opposed to the parent camp Auschwitz I, is in operation by spring 1941. And this is based in an old brick farmhouse and known as the Red House because the bricks haven't been whitewashed. And it's later known as Bunker 1. And then a second temporary gas chamber is set up in another house where the brickwork has been whitewashed, so it becomes the White House, or Bunker 2. And it seems that this has first been used in May 1942. And these two, the Red House, the White House, Bunker 1, Bunker 2, they're used until the spring of 1943. And then Bunker 1 is demolished and Bunker 2 left standing and was actually later used again in May 1944 because this was when the Hungarian Jews were arrived.
Yeah, and in 1942, it's 140,146 Jews who aren't selected for labour were gassed in those two chambers at Bunker 1 and Bunker 2. So they're fully up and running. But
there are plans at this time in sort of 1942 to build a crematorium in the parent camp, but these are suddenly abandoned in favour of Birkenau, which is sort of further out of the way. It's less cramped. But Birkenau is a vast, vast space. I mean, we all know that archway and the brick building that the railway line goes through. But actually, once you get the other side, it is absolutely huge. It's on this huge flat ground, and it's much easier to kind of hide these gas chambers at the far end. And the gas chambers are all built at the far end. So you go through the arch and the railway doesn't come into being until May 1944. So to start off, it's just a road. And the first two big crematoria, Crematorium 3 and 2, are built at the far end of this, right at the opposite end of the site. I'm trying to think how far that is. It's got to be a third of a mile or something like that.
Right.
So Crematorium 2 is built by Hütte Hoch und Tiefbau, which is the Hütte Structural and Foundation Engineering in Katowice, Katowice is the kind of region's town into which Auschwitz falls. And it is the firm Topf & Son are given the job of installing the ovens and other equipment and gas testing equipment. And this is completed in July 1942.
And they spend a great deal of intellectual effort on it, don't they? They have to patent stuff to...
Yeah, and they know exactly what it's for.
They know exactly what it's for. Exactly. They aren't lied to about what it's for.
Well, and also, that's what just makes such a nonsense of that opening quote. Because they're pleading with her to allow her, oh, no, she can't, she might talk. Well, to who? She's a prisoner. And everyone knows anyway.
Yes, but it also points to that they know that what they're doing is wrong. It points to the heart of the crime, doesn't it? As you say, where's she going to go? She's not going to get away. She's in the death camp, but they know it still needs to be concealed.
That's just ridiculous, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's just appalling.
And there's an engineer called Kurt Prüfer who designs the equipment. And what's extraordinary is he suggests adding heating into the gas chambers to speed up the effect of gas in winter.
Because Zyklon B is crystals.
That's right.
And it has to turn into gas at 26 degrees centigrade.
Yeah.
So they build Crematorium 3 and 2, and they're at the far end of that track going under the arch, right at the far end of the site, right and left of the main road into the camp. Then they also build Crematoria 4 and 5, and they're built and arranged in a very similar way. So you have sort of steps down into the changing room and so on, and then the gas chamber, and then the lifts up to the actual incinerators. And they are built, as you're going through the archway, they're kind of way over to the right, to the far end of beyond what the area known as Canada.
Yes.
But all three crematoria are quite a long way from the barracks. They're disguised by trees, shrubs, electric fencing plus guards and stuff. Construction of them is actually pretty slow. And the last crematorium is not complete until late 1943. I think that is 5. Partly due to the bad weather, but also because Topf & Son had to develop this special equipment that they'd patented.
It's extraordinary. Which isn't to say that with all this building work, they're still murdering people. I mean, in 1943, it's 220,000 Jews are gassed at Auschwitz while this building work's going on. So what we're not saying is that it's all on pause, it's yet to happen. This work's going on alongside the murder.
Yes, and absolutely. And they're still using the one in Auschwitz, in the parent camp. So the Crematorium 4 is finished first. That's handed over to the SS on the 22nd of March 1943. Crematorium 2 is finished on the 31st of March. Crematorium 5 on the 4th of April, and Crematorium 3 on the 24th of June. So, yeah, the old crematorium, parent camp, this is closed in July 1943.
Yeah.
And weirdly, this is the only gas chamber that's still there, because it was later used as an air raid shelter. So you can see it. You know, it is, I don't know, have you ever been there?
No, I haven't, no.
Oh my God. It's just, you go in there and it's just horrible. There was plans to build an even bigger crematorium, which would be Crematorium 6. But actually, the focus of construction inside the camp from that moment on is to expand it even further, but also to build this railway branch line right into the camp. So originally, you'd walk quite a long way to the parent camp, the brick building, the original immigrants camp, army camp. Then they built a kind of extended the branch line, and they put in kind of little platforms so you could come down onto it. They're still there. Then they extend it, and what you would then do is walk across this open expanse up to the big brick building of Birkenau with the archway. Then they kind of, over that last year, they then built the branch line that goes through the archway and all the way down to the gas chambers, and that was completed in May 1944.
That's the image people probably have of Auschwitz,
exactly
the railway line. And
Crematorium 2 and 3 are the largest, and they have a capacity to murder and incinerate 1,400 corpses per day.
God.
And it's the gassing's not the issue; it's the incineration that's the problem.
Yeah.
That's what takes the time, because actually you need a huge amount of heat to incinerate a body and turn something to ash.
That causes problems, doesn't it? Because of the rate of killing, and the technology isn't able to keep up. As we've said before in previous episodes, all horrifying. And in it is this cruelty to it, and the people being murdered are being mocked again. That there are manipulated and lied to, even as they're taken to their death. There's signs in different languages showing the way to the bathroom and the disinfection room. Signs saying "one louse, your death." And then prisoners are told to undress, and these gas chambers are made to look like communal showers.
Yeah, so in the changing rooms where you go down these steps and you go into the changing room, and it's a sort of long rectangular room, concrete sides, all the rest of it. They've got pegs on there and benches, and you're all told to undress, which is really, really humiliating because you might be mixed sexes, mixed ages, and this is an era where nakedness is really humiliating. It's a very, very private thing. So to suddenly be an old man or an old woman having to undress and get naked with children and younger people and men and women is another sort of massive level of humiliation. They're then led into so you go down the entrance into the gas chamber is at the far end on the right hand side, and you go into the gas chamber. There would be guards there, quite often with towels and soap and things. Yeah. They then go in, and then they shut the door, and there's a peephole on the door, and it's obviously gas proof, and the gas comes out of shower heads.
See that aspect of it. Even in the murder, there's a lie, isn't there?
Yeah,
it's so horrible.
And as we were talking about yesterday, Zyklon B doesn't kill you immediately by any stretch of the imagination. It's a very horrible way to go. Yeah. And obviously you've got people panicking and scrabbling, and there is this terrible realization that what is going to happen, and obviously people are dying at different stages, and the longer you're alive, the more your pain is going to be, and the more panic and fear, and they look through the peepholes until they can see that everyone's dead, and then the poisonous air is pumped out, which takes about 15 minutes. The gassing process can take up to sort of 3/4 of an hour, and once it's safe to go inside, the doors opened as a special unit of prisoners known as the Sonderkommando. We'll get onto them in a minute. They hose down the gas chamber and use hooked poles to kind of pry apart the dead bodies.
They're all tangled together in their agonies, aren't they? It's the thing.
So rings are removed, gold teeth plucked out of teeth, so teeth just wrenched out with pliers. Hair is cut off as well, and then the bodies are hoisted onto an elevator into the incineration room, where they're then turned to ash, and then the ash from the bodies is then poured into nearby trenches and ponds. There's ash ponds still outside Crematorium 2 and 3.
God.
And also loaded onto the trucks. They're then scattered in surrounding rivers or spread as bone meal on, as fertilizer on fields. The big problem is they're burning kind of, 10 bodies an hour in each oven, but this obviously requires immense heat and causes substantial damage to the chimney. By the summer of 1944, they're burning corpses in the open air again. Some of the crematoria are just failing.
I mean, honestly,
it's just the cruelty of it is just completely horrific, but also fantastical that a nation as advanced as the Germans, you think about the levels of culture, art, music, literature, engineering, scientific brilliance that Germany has produced in the previous 200 years, 300 years.
Yeah.
And yet they've turned into this absolutely monstrous regime of mass murder. This is the ordinary men. It is so incomprehensible. It's so hard to get your head around it.
And the historiography, there's the Daniel Jonah Goldhagen book, famously in the 90s, Hitler's Willing Executioners, which tried to get to grips with where does this fit into a cultural continuity, or is it a moment that's an exception, or is it a moment that's actually the rule? For me, the thing that always strikes me is that it's showerheads. The dishonesty, as well as the cruelty, as well as the...
It's layer upon layer upon layer of
exactly.
gross deception, isn't it?
Exactly. The twist of realising that they're not showers and that you're being murdered. You know, if you've held on to the hope that you'll live till that moment, it's taken from you. The language around it is that the Nazis regard Jews as vermin. And that's exactly how they're treating them. But they also know that they're human. So they're lying to them and they're twisting the knife even in the last seconds. And I find it, you have to comprehend it because it happened. It strikes one as incomprehensible and literally incredible. But it happened. I mean, this is the thing.
But I think it also, particularly now, here we are on the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the 80th anniversary of 1945 and the end of the Second World War. It reminds us, I think, of the fragility of the peace and freedoms and democracy we enjoy at the moment. Yeah. And, you forget that at your peril. I mean, really, because it's such a small change. That's the point.
Well, and how things can accelerate and radicalise themselves very, very, very rapidly. Because after all, we've talked about how this is a sort of slide from the disappointment of Barbarossa into mass murder. That yes, they're killing people when Barbarossa starts, but it's the fact that they haven't conquered the Soviet Union. They haven't got these eastern places to send people to. In the German mindset, this is happening in Germany, after all. It's not happening in Poland. It's not happening.
No. It's happening within the Reich.
And in this colonial new town. Anyway.
So we've got to talk about the mass extermination of Europe's Jews. So the first mass transports are organised by the RSHA. So this is Heydrich. And they arrive at Auschwitz-Birkenau on the evening of the 25th of March, 1942. This is 1,000 in all. 27th of March, a further 800 Jewish women from Slovakia reach the camp. 30th of March, 1,100 Jewish men and women from different nationalities from French internment camps.
So this is the point. It's from the rest of the Greater Reich, from the west and the foreign part.
But they're not murdered immediately. They are registered, received into the camp. The systematic extermination operations really only begins in May 1942. This is Jews from Upper Silesia, Slovakia, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And because of Germany's spring offensive in the Soviet Union, transport routes to the Reinhard camp are starting to get a little bit choked and busy. But at this point in 1942, Auschwitz-Birkenau is still not designated as an extermination camp. No. It is not part of the Reinhard camps. But 17th to the 18th of July 1942, Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, visits the camp and tours the agricultural state and inspects building projects, but the main purpose is to be shown the new method of mass killing. Yeah. This is the gas chambers. From the selection on arrival to leading people into the gas chambers and obviously then incinerating the bodies. Yeah. At a dinner on the 17th of July, held by the Gauleiter of Upper Silesia, Fritz Bracht, Himmler professes to be very satisfied by what he's seen. And on that same night, he promotes Rudolf Höss, who's the commandant of Auschwitz, to Obersturmbannführer. So that's like colonel, isn't it? Lieutenant colonel. And then soon after, Himmler declares general government should be Jew-free by the end of the year 1942. Yeah. And after this visit, this is the moment where Birkenau starts to become an extermination camp. Yeah. And after this, the number of mass transports of Jews increases every month. And, this is it. The mass killings have begun at Birkenau.
Yeah, and it reaches the point where they're not bothering to register people anymore. They just bring them in and kill them.
No, the whole kind of tattoo thing is a kind of concentration camp thing rather than an extermination camp. You don't need to tattoo anyone if they're...
Yeah, the processing that happened before isn't happening. I mean, it's interesting. It's places that have been conquered, but also allies who've given in on the question of deportation or agreed to deportation.
They've just had ceaseless pressure from Germany to hand over their Jews. So Romania falls in line, Croatia, Finland, Norway, later Bulgaria, Italy, Hungary. Greece's Jews, obviously Greece is not an ally. Yeah. They're also rounded up. Actually, it's Hungary, then Greece is the proportion of Jews that are killed in the war as a proportion of the population. First transports from Vienna arrive in mid-July 1942. First transports from the Old Reich, so the original German state, arrive in November and December 1942. And this follows an announcement that all concentration camps in the Old Reich are now to be Judenrein, so Jew-free. Yeah. So that means some 2,000 Jewish inmates from German concentration camps are brought to Birkenau. Yeah. This policy actually then changes back again in March 1944 because of the chronic labour shortage. Yeah. Jews brought back into Germany as forced labour, and we've been in our Victory 45, but we've been writing about Hugo Grin and his father, who are
his experience.
Carpathian Jews. Then they become Hungarian Jews because the borders changes in 1938, I think it is.
So they're reclassified.
Yeah, so they arrive in Auschwitz in sort of June, July 1944. But his father and Hugo Grin are only at Auschwitz for kind of 2-3 weeks, and then they're sent as labour southeast of Berlin. There's also there's a transit camp for Jews in Germany, which is Theresienstadt, or Terezin, as it's known in Nazi Germany. And Terezin is this kind of weird place. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's a really, really weird place. I think it's based around a kind of, one of those sort of Vauban style forts, but it's kind of like a model ghetto. And they use it as a kind of halfway house, as a quarantine, effectively. There's a film you can see on YouTube of the Terezin camp where they're all sort of playing football, and there's an orchestra, and they're all happy Jews together in their own camp, in their own ghetto, and it's all very, very nice, except they all look absolutely miserable, as you can imagine. They're then sent from Terezin to Auschwitz into the kind of area that's called the family camp. This is area B2B, which is separated from the rest of Auschwitz-Birkenau.
Yeah.
But it's a complete sham. It only lasts 6 months, and the family camp is shut down, and most of the inmates then killed in March and July 1944.
But once you're in the middle of 1944, well, the war is obviously going very badly for Germany, and this adds impetus or urgency to the need to It's war aim, exactly, to attain this war aim. But they extend the railway line through the main arch, and this is done in time for the arrival of Jews from Hungary. And the Hungarian government is an ally, then flips, and then is overthrown by the Germans. Again, this is remarkable that we're talking about the period running up to D-Day, and this is, Overlord is obviously coming. There is going to be an invasion in Western Europe in the summer of 1944. There's no two ways about it. Everyone knows this. The Germans don't know where it's going to happen, or they could reasonably guess. But what they're focused on is getting their hands on Hungarian Jews and murdering them. And so the tempo of that is absolutely amazing. I mean, between the 15th of May and the 9th of July, 438,000 people.
I mean, it's 10,000 a day. And if, for anyone who's been to a sporting fixture, whether you've been to a sort of, baseball game, a cricket match, a football match, 10,000 people is a hell of a lot of people all pouring out of trains. And of these 438,000, only 15% taken into the camp as workers.
Yeah.
All the others are murdered on arrival. So Hugo Grin and his family, that we mentioned earlier on. So he arrives with, he's got his younger brother, his mother, his father. As he's getting off the train, one of the Sonderkommando guys tries to take his rucksack, and he tries to hold on to it. And the guy says to him, "Say you're 19. Say you're 19." And he releases his rucksack to this guy. As he gets off, they're all being separated. So his younger brother gets whisked away. That's it, straight into the gas chambers. His younger brother, alone, without his parents, without his brother. His mother gets separated from father and son. Hugo Grin says he is 19, and he gets exempted. So him and his father get put off into the forced labour, and later get sent to Germany and survive. It's just horrendous.
This is such a big project that Rudolf Höss is brought back to ensure that it runs properly, and is awarded, once he leaves on the 29th of July, he's awarded with the War Merit Cross first and second class. So that tells you, Jim, it's a war front. It's a war.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
If you're being given thank you for your service, pat on the head. Yeah. Absolutely extraordinary. And between 60 to 70,000 Jews from Lod, which is the last ghetto to be destroyed in occupied Poland, because after all, the Red Army arrived in September, October 1944. And then on the 30th of October, the train carrying 2,000 Jews from Terezin, including the composer Pavel Haas, was its last major transportation.
Yeah.
James.
Yeah, we need to talk about selection.
Yes, we do. Although, as we said, we've touched on it with the fact that eventually that deteriorates. They don't log you. They don't write your name down or give you a number or any of that. They just kill you.
By the summer of 1944, you're arriving straight into these platforms. So the main railway line is a single track, go through the archway, and then it branches out into little branches so that you can have multiple trains coming in at one time. If you've got 10,000, you need a number of trains stacked up. Journey itself has been traumatic because people are crammed into kind of, just freight wagons, wooden freight wagons with just a bucket for sanitary requirements. All very, very grim. Lots of people are kind of very thirsty, very tired, discombobulated, to put it mildly, and traumatized by the whole experience. And it could be a matter of a few days, could be kind of weeks, these journeys. So
what's extraordinary is you had to buy a third-class ticket, 4 pfennigs per person for every kilometre of track. For children on 2 pfennigs. And you had a luggage allowance. I mean, you
had a luggage allowance of 30 to 50 kilograms, which is actually quite a lot.
But that just tells you that, from the perspective of the people doing this, is that it's about getting stuff.
There's 2 purposes for that. The one is to hoodwink the people going, and the second one is to steal it.
Is to shake them down. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The moment they arrive, they're kind of ordered off the wagons onto the platforms, and the combination of Sonderkommando and SS guards. Sonderkommando take all the suitcases, and the guards start moving people out, so they're separated by sex, so families torn apart completely right from the word go. Older teenage boys, men in their 20s and 30s, and younger women siphoned off to become forced labour. Yeah. Obviously, they're still going to be killed. It's extermination through work, and very, very very few survive, but they're not going to be gassed immediately. From the spring of 1944 onwards, because of the requirement for skilled labour, if you can sort of say, I was a plasterer or I'm a builder or a bricklayer or something like that, then you'll immediately get siphoned off and your chances of surviving are considerably greater. But all the rest are taken literally straight down to the gas chamber. So, you can be dead within an hour of arriving in Auschwitz. So again, that's extremely traumatic. Some 2,000 prisoners employed to clear away the luggage have been brought in, and these are then sorted into bundles. So the suitcases are opened, food, household goods, clothes, medicine, small items of furniture, jewellery, clocks, etc. They're all put into different areas. They're stored in 30 barracks surrounded by barbed wire, built at the camp section B2G, which is on the kind of sort of right-hand side as you're going in. And the storage ground there is called Canada. And if you buy the inmates as a sort of the land of the promised land, the land of plenty. Yeah. And obviously working in Canada gives you certain kind of perks, but also all the guards are kind of nicking stuff as well. All the plunder is sent back into the Reich for the most part, unless it's kind of half-inched by the guards, including the gold. And I remember doing a TV program on this and looking into all the gold. It's still in circulation, is the truth of it, because it's melted down in Berlin and then repurposed.
Yeah. Well, Luftwaffe pilots and U-boat crews and bombed out residents of Berlin would get watches and stuff.
Yeah.
And they're taking prosthetics as well, aren't they? I mean, after people are murdered, their prosthetics go into the booty, the loot from the murder. And the guards help themselves, of course, and then stuff is sent west for Germans. The other thing is, I mean, it's important. I mean, we've talked about murder of the Jews of Europe here, but it's important to remember that Sinti and Roma, they're also being murdered at Auschwitz. And again, it accelerates. It's this thing where it starts off in December 1942. Himmler orders them to be locked up for the duration. Then once he's got Auschwitz-Birkenau up and running, what's the
point of imprisoning when we could just murder them?
Yeah, exactly.
So first transport arrives in February 1943.
Yeah.
And they continue to come in stages. There's 22,600. Sinter and Roma, they're brought into Birkenau. Half of those are elderly people or children. Around 1,700 are murdered immediately. The rest actually are registered and given a Z on their winkles, this patch you put on your uniform.
Yeah.
And they're initially kept in the quote-unquote family camp.
Yeah.
The conditions are obviously absolutely appalling. Disease is absolutely rife, and within no time 7,000 of them have died from malnutrition, typhus, and Noma, which is a gangrenous infection of the stomach. I mean, can you think of anything worse?
The suffering in all this, and
yes, and again there's the acceleration. So in May 1944, Himmler orders the murder of the gypsies. Over 3,000 have been transferred to other camps by then, but there's still some at Birkenau, and they're killed not by gassing but by phenol, or abspritzen as the Germans call it, which is injecting to death.
Yeah, they're injected with phenol in the heart, isn't it? Which kills them. Then in August, the family camp's dissolved. The rest are liquidated. And you've also non-Polish Jews, which is the sort of Polizeihäftlinge, police prisoners, which is the sort of hangover from when the Germans first invaded Poland and dissolved the Polish state. What's left of that? In fact, that's what's left of Auschwitz's origins as a concentration camp, isn't it? As a processing place for the defunct Polish state. You touched on this in the first half, Jim, where you say how can Germany, this country with so much science and technology and culture and all this sort of stuff, find itself doing this? But medicine, doctors are intimately involved in this process, and they're using Auschwitz is like lots of other concentration lagers. It's being used for medical research, experiments that they consider vital to the war effort, and of course, don't forget that means the Nazi war effort. So it's through the prism of Nazi cruelty and Nazi racial theory, this war effort.
Yeah, so all these incredibly eminent doctors are all convinced, these total sickos have convinced themselves that what they're doing is for the greater good. It's just unbelievable. So there's a host of them. I mean, obviously everyone's heard of Mengele, but there's a host of them that come here.
There's loads of these guys. There's Dr. Karl Klauberg, who's the senior doctor at a women's hospital in Königshütte in Upper Silesia. He sets up rooms in Block 10 at Auschwitz I and studies methods of sterilization and artificial insemination on hundreds of women.
Can you imagine how traumatic that must have been? Yeah,
actual human guinea pigs. Dr. Edward Wirtz, who's a gynecologist from Hamburg, he carries out numerous experiments on women. There's
SS Dr. Horst Schumann, who's involved in the euthanasia program Action 14F13, but also at Auschwitz experimenting with X-rays to make men and women infertile. Dr. Paul Kramer, who's professor of anatomy and human genetic theory at the University of Munster. So, proper academic. He's carrying out research on weakened prisoners between August and November 1942, examining the consequences of of food withdrawal from the human organs. I mean,
Yeah.
Christ.
The thing to remember is when, his title, Human Genetic Theory, but that'll be framed within Nazi racial theory.
Of course.
The fact these people have these degrees with these titles, because after all, Mengele is an anthropologist, but a Nazi anthropologist. There's a hygiene institute the Waffen-SS created at Auschwitz, so they perform experiments on body parts and dead and living prisoners. Mengele, of course, comes to Auschwitz in May 1943, and he's been a soldier. He's been out with the SS Viking Division, hasn't he?
He gets wounded and then gets sent there. He's an academic doctor of anthropology, and that's why he's been fighting, as opposed to a medical doctor.
Yeah.
And then gets sent there. And his speciality is genetics, especially of twins. So he experiments on as many as 1,000 to 1,500 pairs of twins, especially children. And then finally, there's Dr. August Hirt, who also carrying out experiments to prove the superiority of Aryans. Loads of prisoners are anatomically measured.
Yes, he's measuring people, isn't he?
And then he moves out of Auschwitz and takes with him a number of the skeletons that he's been working on, people he's been studying. We should talk about the Sonderkommando.
Yeah.
So these are mostly Jewish inmates by 1943. Initially, there's just a dozen Soviet POWs and then some Poles. But it grows to 400 in number by beginning of 1944, and then as many as 900 by the summer of 1944. By which time, there's a constant churn of prisoners coming in and being gassed. That it's 24/7 day and night shifts.
Yeah, and doing the dirty work is the thing. So they're
because they don't want to upset the SS.
Yeah, I know. I mean, again, we come back to that. There's so many things at work in that attitude, isn't there? In a state that doesn't care about how anyone feels, that they care about the SS's. Himmler's caring about his people's feelings, and they're loading the luggage of new arrivals. They're accompanying prisoners to the crematoria. They're taking the rings off the corpses. They're pulling the teeth. They're cutting the hair. They're putting the corpses onto the hoists. They're digging mass graves. You live a little longer if you do this.
Yes, it's extermination-free working.
I mean, you live a little longer, but the
what?
thing you're having to do is a living hell, surely. I mean,
yes, of course.
Tiny handful survive.
Very, very tiny handful, yeah. And actually, their testimonies have been some quite pioneering work on all this. And there's a book by the surviving Sonderkommando, and it is unbelievable. It's really, really hard to read, I have to say. And of course, all this loot, as we touched on earlier, the gold is sent to Berlin, where it's melted down. And I remember going to the archive in Auschwitz I in the original camp, and they didn't burn everything at the end of the war. And they have these little dockets. They're like they're sort of rectangular, half an A4 sort of size. And on every single docket, it's got the name of the person they've murdered, the date they're murdered, and the number of teeth. So sort of, upper B3, lower B7 or whatever the term is.
Of course, the stuff that the dentist mumbles while they're looking at your teeth.
Exactly. And it's every single one is noted. So it might be 3 teeth, it might be 4 teeth, it might be a whole host of teeth. And they're there, and you can just look at these things, and there they all are. I mean, it's just...
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Then the hair is spun into thread and turned into felt. It's also used for rope and the manufacture of mattresses. Among those who bought it at a price of 50 pfennigs per kilo were the Bremen Wool Carding Company and the Alex Zinc Felt Factory. And of course the ash, as we touched on again, is used as fertilizer. I think it's really important to understand that this is all going on side by side while the quote-unquote model town is being developed.
Yes.
And there's a quote by a British POW held at Auschwitz III, which is, of course, Monowitz. The population at Auschwitz was fully aware that people were being gassed and burned. On one occasion, they complained about the stench of the burning bodies. Of course, all the Farben people knew what was going on. Nobody could live in Auschwitz and work in the plant or even come down to the plant without knowing what was common knowledge to everybody.
Yeah.
And what's absolutely extraordinary is the civilian population regularly make inquiries to the SS guards about whether personal effects of prisoners might be for sale.
I mean, at the start of the murder process, they sort of run engines, don't they, and make sure there's sort of loud banging and stuff to cover up the screams. By 1944, when it's absolute relentless mass killing, there's no attempt to pretend anything. And of course, so if the locals know, what do the Allies know? And it sort of strays into what-if territory. And I'm sort of not interested in that. After all, we know how good Allied bombers are at hitting their targets precisely. The answer is not very good. So what might you have achieved?
Well, I think that's the issue.
Isn't it? You can attack the artificial rubber factory, perhaps.
And they do. And they bomb it 5 times.
And they do, exactly. They do attack the Buddha.
I mean, the best way to save the people at Auschwitz probably is just win the war as quickly as possible.
So the Polish government in exile, they're publishing reports about Auschwitz and gassing experiments in July 1942. So it's known. The BBC reports on this in the order of 1943. Allied governments know from August 1942, as does the Vatican.
Yep.
As we said, the people who've managed to escape, there's this, particularly during the period of expansion at the camp. And, so you get Alfred Wetzler and Rudolf Werber, who later calls himself Rudolf Rosenberg. They're two Jewish prisoners from Slovakia. They get out. They get to safety by April 1944. They warn representatives of the Slovakian Jewish Council about plans to murder all of Hungary's Jews and those coming from terrorism. It doesn't save them. This doesn't reach Allied hands until June of 1944, by which time, that ship has sailed. I mean, one of the things is that this part of the Reich has been out of range of Allied bombers until the Foggia airfields, that if people have been listening to our podcasts about the fighting in Italy, a crucial objective in the invasion of mainland Italy, that you need the Foggia airfields so you can get to the Plesty oil fields and places like Upper Silesia. And it's not until those airfields are online that the Allies can bomb the site. They do bomb the artificial rubber plant, as we said, the IG Farben-Bühne plant.
Yeah, but also they don't do that till the 5th of August because it's totally impracticable to be able to do that before August because of the danger from the Luftwaffe and all the rest of it going that far in, because that is beyond fighter range. And by that point, it's kind of almost done anyway. I mean, but the end is nigh by the sort of late summer of 1944. It is already starting to be wound down
because there's no one left to kill, right? But it comes down to, right?
To a large degree, yeah. But they have got themselves organised into a resistance group. You must just think, well, I've got absolutely nothing to lose.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of them by this point. So they kind of, they do talk about the combat group Auschwitz, which is, but it doesn't really come to anything. And the uprising is eventually prompted when the SS murdered 200 Sonderkommando with cyanide. And they then learn that 300 more are due to be killed. And the Sonderkommando that are surviving at the crematoriums of 4 and 5 are ordered to make the selection. So they make the selections. And on the 7th of October, the SS announced that those selected are going to be transferred to another camp. The survivors know, and the people who've been selected know this is a euphemism for imminent murder. And at that point, they just spontaneously erupt. And guards at Crematorium 4 are attacked with stones and axes and iron bars, and building is set on fire. The smoke alarms prisoners in other crematoria. I mean, it's absolute mayhem. SS set up machine guns and fire into the crowd, which is then, that crowd is then forced to take cover by Crematorium 5. The rebellion then spreads to Crematorium 2, and where prisoners manage to part the barbed wire and flee, and 3 camp guards are killed and 12 injured. I mean, it's not very many in the big scheme of things. Well, the Sonderkommando suffer 425 killed and murdered over 3 days. And some of these people that escape are tracked down to a barn, which is then set on fire, and they're all burned alive. A number of Sonderkommando are tortured for a week before being hanged in the Prairie camp on the 6th of January 1945. And not one prisoner from this uprising managed to successfully escape. But Crematorium 4 is completely wrecked. And the Sonderkommando have also managed to smuggle out a number of photos that they've taken of the camps and bodies and all the rest of it. So it's kind of, this is another thing that sort of accelerates the wind down, really.
Yeah.
But, the Red Army's getting closer, of course.
Well, the Red Army's getting closer. Exactly. They're not far from, this is the interesting thing, isn't it? Is in July of 1944, they're only 200 k's from Auschwitz. They've got to
most of 120 miles, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's the thing, that the Nazis then go into this sort of reverse ferret mode, trying to figure out what to do. And the idea is to go west, so relocate. Thousands of prisoners and personal effects are sent back to the old Reich in trains and trucks. The 155,000 prisoners who are in Auschwitz in the summer of 1944 were Poles and Russians in general. And of course, the Germans have killed so many Russians by starvation.
Yep.
They're sent to concentration camps in the west, to Buchenwald, Flossenburg, Dachau, Mauthausen, Großrosen, Bergen-Belsen, Natzweiler, Sachsenhausen. I mean, the thing is, and these are the headline camps, are there? There are other satellite camps. All of these places have satellite camps, have feeder camps, there's a whole infrastructure of these camps. These are the sort of headline name one. Yeah. But they carry on. Auschwitz carries on as normal while this is going on, even as it's being sort of decommissioned. At Birkenau, they're still building a new area, nicknamed Mexico. This is going to be twice the size. I mean, even in defeat, even with the Red Army on the doorstep, even as they're taking measures to deal with,
just gone mad, hasn't it?
Yeah. But then in November, building work stops in October 1944. Then Himmler orders the gassing operations to cease in November, but there's still full tilt in October. 40,000 people, 10,000 people a week been murdered. Yeah, and then the Sonderkommando are ordered to dismantle the killing installations, remove all traces of crimes, clear and level the corpse burning trenches and all that. And of course, that work's kind of done, but incompletely. As you said earlier, the crematorium 1 is then turned into an air raid shelter, and the others are pulled down, and the usable parts are sent elsewhere.
Yep.
So there's this sort of frantic effort, also running parallel with new building effort. Again, contradictions, paradoxes, all at once.
So then in January 1945, Red Army has encircled German troops near Krakow, which is, only 35, 40 miles away. They have taken over Upper Silesia and they're pushing on towards the River Oder. So really it is only a matter of time before they reach Auschwitz. And the Gauleiter Fritz Bracht has ordered the evacuation of the district and the regional capital, Katowice, which we mentioned earlier on. And prisoners start, the prisoners still there at Auschwitz start to be sent west in columns, initially on foot, also by rail, so that it can still be used as forced labor in the old Reich. I mean, it's just astonishing. So by the 17th of January, 58,000 prisoners have been moved, and the second phase of the clearing out begins. 20,000 from Auschwitz 1 and 2, and the rest from Monowitz and the subcamps there. But what is incredible about all this is IG Auschwitz, the IG Farben Buna factory, never opened for business. Not a single bit of rubber is produced there. They're still building it.
My God.
So after all that, I mean, you were talking about how pointless it all is. There you go. Some of the last prisoners are taken by train. Most march out on foot. Any trying to flee, shot as those, obviously, who are falling behind. Loads and loads and loads perish on the way because it's January, it's freezing, it's Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
They're already malnourished. They're already overworked. They're already appallingly abused. And it's just a litter of dead bodies all along the way. 15,000 out of the 20,000 die in the evacuation. By mid-January, the SS at Auschwitz are furiously trying to clear out. So papers are being incinerated, equipment removed. The Mengele, Joseph Mengele finally closes down his labs because there's no more human material left for him to experiment on. On the 20th and 21st of January, the SS sentries are removed from the watchtowers. Remains of crematoria 2 and 3 are blown up on the 20th of January. You can still see the remains of them to this day. Yeah. Executions by shooting still taking place of the last prisoners. Only during the night of the 25th and 26th of January was the last extermination installation finally blown up. Incredible. And then on Saturday, the 27th of January, 1945, Red Army troops of the 60th Army of the 1st Ukrainian Front finally reach Auschwitz and liberate it. They find at least 600 corpses, as well as some 7,000 prisoners who are still there, who haven't been moved. 5,800 at Birkenau, 800 in the infirmary in the parent camp, and 500 in the subcamps. And in the warehouses, they discover 370,000 men's suits, 837,000 women's coats and dresses, huge amounts of children's clothing, 44,000 pairs of shoes, and 7.7 tons of human hair from at least 140,000 women.
There's nothing to say, is there? Imagine discovering this.
Yeah.
The frantic efforts by the SS, now they know they're going to get caught. Now they know it's catching up with them. From the time in 1942 where Himmler's saying, it's a tough job, but someone's got to do it, to knowing they're criminals and that their time's up. Yeah. Ah, God. I mean...
We've got to talk about numbers.
Well, we do need to talk. We do. I mean, and the thing is in the end, we don't know. The thing is in the end, the numbers are imprecise. It's reckoned that between 1.1 million and 1.5 million people were killed at Auschwitz, of whom around about 960,000 were Jews.
I think we should do it anyway. So say it's 438,000 from Hungary, 300,000 from Poland, 69,000 from France, 60,000 from the Netherlands, 55,000 from Greece, 46,000 from Czechoslovakia, 27,000 from Slovakia, 25,000 from Belgium, 23,000 from the Old Reich, 10,000 from Croatia, 6,000 from Italy, 6,000 from Belarus, 1,600 from Austria, 700 from Norway, and a further 200,000 prisoners dying from hunger, disease, and other causes. Yeah. That is some litany, isn't it?
Jim, we've talked about battles in which, a division will take 1,600 casualties, and we're like, well, that's a disaster for them. They've had a terrible, bad week. And then you look at these numbers. You look at the machinery that's been put in place and its evolution to it. I mean, that's the other thing is the acceleration, the evolution, the development. Because we talk a lot on this podcast about the way the Allies develop the way they're going to learn to fight and the way they develop their structures and they develop their operational method. And here we are on the black reverse of that, which is the operational method for murdering people, the technology, the organizational art that goes into it. That this is the core of the German war aim and Nazi war aim in the Second World War. Well, we hope that you've been able to get through this, to be honest. Found it interesting.
And learned something.
Learned something from it. In our next podcast, we will be talking to Rob Rinder, who some of you may know as Judge Rinder, who's been involved in Holocaust remembrance and investigating his own family story and looking at what happened to his family in the Holocaust. And we're very much looking forward to talking to him. Thank you so much for listening to this series. There's a bit of me that wants to sort of say normal service will be resumed as soon as possible.
I know what you mean. I've got to say it's pretty harrowing researching all this. You know, I'm kind of glad I did, because I think it is really important, and I think particularly now in where we are at the moment in the world, I think it's important as much as it's ever been not to forget what happened, not to forget how quickly the descent into the abyss came about, and you know, crikey, you know, it's important to understand that, you know, Auschwitz is not it might become the symbol of the Holocaust because it's still there. You can visit it, and so that's why it's become the symbol. And I think it is important to have kind of focuses of remembrance. And Auschwitz is as good a place as any to make that focus. But it is important to understand that this is just one part of the Holocaust, albeit a big part. But its history, how it began, how it descended from concentration camp of Polish prisoners to extermination camp it's quite a story.
Well, if we can wrap this up with a quote from one of the Sonderkommando, who's asked, "What was destroyed in you by that extreme experience?" "Life. Since then, I've never had a normal life. I've never been able to pretend that everything was all right and go off dancing like others without a care in the world. Everything takes me back to the camp. Whatever I do, whatever I see, my mind keeps harking back to the same place. It's as if the work I was forced to do there had never really left my head. Nobody ever really gets out of the crematorium." Thanks for listening. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.